Entrepreneurs, if you want your employees to be respected, appreciated, fulfilled, and engaged, this is the episode for you. Today, Rich and I are going to sit down with Merrylue Martin, the president and CEO of Job Joy Group, and also the author of the book, Big Quit Survival Guide. Rich, great conversation. Can't wait to hear what you learned and loved about this one.
Wow, between the 3 R's and how to have a conversation with really getting to know our people, even if they've been long-term employees, and how do you start that? I thought that was excellent. And that people really want to have a voice and not just a job. We cover an awful lot in this episode for leaders.
Yeah, I was also reminded about one of the key leadership traits that we learned together back 25 years ago that was kind of brought to the forefront of this conversation that I loved. At the end of this episode, there's also a survival kit for our guest listeners. So here is Merrylue Martin. Merrylue, thanks for joining the Entrepreneurs United podcast. We can't wait to hear more about your book and what you're doing and how leaders can help their employees become more respected, appreciated, fulfilled, engaged. It's something we all need to hear more of. So thanks for joining us today. Can't wait to jump in.
Great. Thanks, John and Rich. It's a pleasure to be here and discuss the most exciting time I think we could ever be in the workplace.
Yeah, there's a lot of changes that need to come. And I can't wait to actually share some of the thoughts I have around this topic because I've been thinking a lot about it. And I'd love to bounce some of those ideas off of you. But, first off, before we get to the book that you wrote, that I think is a really important subject that we all need to be talking about and what you currently do, walk us back through a little bit of your foundation because, the workplace has evolved and changed. Employees have evolved and changed. Leaders need to evolve and change. Where did this all come to be for you? And how did you end up where you are today?
Absolutely. We've had probably 113 years of a standard of employee-employer relationship, and that has literally been command and control. You think about with the onset of the assembly line, Henry Ford, it was all about efficiency and gains and productivity, and we put supervisors in place to manage that. And it really was about getting product out the door. So, so much of that has evolved. And it wasn't until, literally the huge paradigm shift we've seen since the pandemic and since all of a sudden you start to mix the volatile impression life is very fragile. We all went through that just, a couple of years ago. We looked at this taste of working from home. That wasn't so much the norm. That was sort of a very odd man out kind of exception, to working. And so people really got used to that. And then people started to look at, hey, I want to find work that's going to fit into my life. So my whole premise with this book was to help leaders now understand this paradigm shift. Years and years and years ago, I worked on a lot of research around particularly the human factor. And it's funny because now that's just the upfront and most important point we're looking at right now in the workplace. It's all about psychology, human dynamics, where it meets leadership, which is just brand new for the mainstream. So my work in putting this book out was based in that research. I looked at a lot of the human factor, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In my book, I have the mantra, people are people first. As long as we're employing people, we have got to decide to make give mindful attention to the fact we're dealing with human beings. So I wrote the book for that premise, and I think that's what's evolving so much right now in this workplace.
For 113 years, command and control style, what happened 113 years ago? How are you able to pinpoint that to 113 versus 117 years?
Yeah, I looked at that when I looked at the formation of the assembly line with Henry Ford. And that was the paradigm shift, when we were more of a rural society and it was more of a hunting, gathering, type of survival. And then things became very polarized around big cities. And we had the trains and the infrastructure and all of that being built. That's when the assembly line first came into place. And so what happened was we displaced the craftsmanship, let's say, of an individual person making X. And with the forefront of the Industrial Revolution, we thought, okay, we can put 20 people together, and instead of every one of those 20 people producing X, one of those persons is just going to produce part of X. I think of, and I use in my book as an example of this, remember the TV show I Love Lucy? And
Sure.
she has the assembly line with the candy, and it's coming
Yep.
down the assembly
And it
line.
overruns her, and she can't stuff her mouth with enough candy.
Exactly. And what does the supervisor do? Speed it up. And, it was almost as if you get rewarded by doing great work with more work or faster work. And those that could keep up got rewarded. Those that couldn't got fired. And we worked like that for so many years. Even the validation of how our folks worked. I keep thinking this is not our grandfather's workplace anymore. I know my dad worked for a single company, 45 years, retired. It was all about, I don't care if I love this job or not. I have a commitment to this employer, which was the case back then. There was a two-way loyalty. That's all gone. And now it's more about, hey, what are you going to do for me? And this is what I'm going to do for you. It's become a very transactional relationship with employee, employer, more to the side of the employee lately. We'll talk about, is that changing a bit as we look at, particularly in the tech sector, we're looking at potential layoffs, and balancing of a lot of overhiring. But that's what's shifted. And now it's all about, lifestyle. And it's about, I want work to fit into my life, not I'm going to fit into a job. And that's what still is permeating throughout the workplace. It's not gone away. We all thought come Labor Day, it's all back to normal. We're all going back to the office. We're all going to be okay. Not. We've got hybrids. We've got in office. We've got remote. We've got middle managers right now running around trying to figure how to do all of this, and it's staying around.
You would use command and control, 113-year-old model. What is the model that is counter to command and control that you recommend?
Number one, determine that we're working with a human being now, and I cannot treat this human being as a cog in my wheel of production. So what has surfaced, which was suppressed for those many, many years, for all those reasons we talked about, now that human factor is front and forward. And I'm going to look at those basic human needs. And here's the one that hit us the hardest. We have a need for physiological care. We get that. That's food, water, clothing. We have to be protected. But here's where we got hit really hard with number two, and that's safety. What we're talking about now in the workplace, people are commanding emotional safety, psychological safety. This has been a time unprecedented about employee wellness, about mental health. This has all surfaced. And again, thank you, pandemic, for bringing to light this whole concern around this human dynamic. So to your question, those companies that are getting the human factor and are training their leaders to lead, for example, with empathy. And I want to just sidebar on that a bit because there's a lot of noise right now in what leaders are struggling with. They're told they're supposed to be empathetic. We get that. People are people. Okay, I'm kind of warming up to that. I've got to be that. But how do I be empathetic and still get business done? And I have a simple equation that's pretty tactical to follow. Number one, it just goes like this. Empathy minus accountability equals enabling. And the last thing we want to do as a leader is to enable or coddle or make differentiations for excuses for an employee and not hold this employee accountable. We can be very empathetic but we've got to hold people accountable. And that's just a little sidebar that leaders are struggling with right now. How far do I go being empathetic? So, yeah.
So just to validate, you would say command and control 113 years old, and what you want to move to is acknowledging the human factor is kind of the coin phrase of human factor, correct?
Exactly right. And think of
Got
it
it.
this way. You can take the job out of the human being, but you can't take the human being out of the job unless you're hiring a robot. So we either cater to that theory or we don't. The problem is the ones that don't aren't going to make it in working with the type of top performer that they're going to want to keep today. So we've got to unveil that human being piece.
I want to dig in on this equation that you just gave. Empathy minus accountability equals enabling. Is that a binary equation, just to say empathy without accountability is enabling? Or is that a dynamic equation? In other words, if you have a level 7 empathy and a level 9 accountability, that equals a +2. Like, is there any, is it a dynamic equation or a static equation?
That's a great question. It's a dynamic equation. And the reason for that is we're dealing with dynamic human beings. So let's, for example, empathy and accountability can have different variants depending on the person I'm speaking with. Let me give you a good example. Let's talk about respect. Mixed into that, so much of, respecting someone's self-esteem. I can demonstrate empathy by listening to you, by mirroring your body language, by confirming what I'm hearing you say. It doesn't mean I agree. And I think leaders sometimes hesitate hearing or saying back to an employee, so what I hear you saying is you're not able to be at work on time because of X. Okay, that isn't agreeing with this person, but at least I'm giving this person an empathetic approach to I understand. Now, respect carries a different weight to your question. It can be very dynamic. For example, I might say to you, as part of the team, it's important that we're demonstrating respectful behavior, and I want to make sure I'm doing that as your leader. Now, apart from being civil, we're not going to cuss each other out and bully each other. I'm not talking that kind of respect, but I'm talking about day-to-day behaviors as we interact. How could I best demonstrate respect to you? And as I speak to every employee, I'm going to get a different response. And that's where this dynamic piece comes in dealing with human beings. For example, someone might say to me, well, Merrylue, I'm kind of new to the industry here. I want to get my feet wet in this job. The best thing you could do to demonstrate empathy and respect to me, could I just have 5 minutes every morning of your time just to know you're there, just to check in? If I have a question, I want to make sure I'm on the right track. That would show me so much respect and a heartfelt approach to helping me succeed. I would love that. Now, here's the danger. I walk away as a leader thinking, okay, that's how you demonstrate empathy and respect. You show up in someone's space every 5 minutes. And if I don't ask that individual that question, I'm going to misalign my good intentions as a leader. Another person might say, hey, Merrylue, you know what? My biggest fear in terms of respect is being micromanaged. Therefore, could you just give me my marching orders? What do we need to do here? I can follow through. I'll meet you with the one-on-ones, but apart from that, let me fly. So do you see the dynamics that are so powerful working with people? And leaders, I want them to start embracing that there is no static. There is no on or off, and there is a way to work through that process, human being to human being.
So I think I'm catching on, but I want to throw you out something in my mind for you to either correct or confirm. I just had a direct report of mine who I had a conversation with this week who said, hey, it wasn't my understanding when I got hired that I would have to go into the office. as frequently as what's being asked. And that wasn't what I understood to be true. I've got concern with that. And the back to office policy, I am not in control of, but I am this person's direct supervisor, right? So what I did try to do, and I even told them, I'm trying to balance empathy with, just the facts at hand on what needs to happen. I understand that that wasn't your expectation. I understand that that expectation wasn't my expectation. It wasn't that clear at that time. Today, it's really clear. So in that example, and there's more to it, but I don't want to go too deep down that example. I was trying to balance having empathy towards the experience and the change management that was impacting this person, and how it may impact their home life and how their expectations and all of that, with the pure fact that things have changed, and things need to change for you too. Now, our back to the office policy is very hybrid favored. So it's not a complete switch around. So if I had an empathy of a 9 and an accountability of a 7, I want to end up at a positive number on enabling, because that's positive enabling. But in this example, if I had an empathy of like a 1 and I was like, yeah, too bad, things changed, not in my control, that's what needs to happen. Let's say I have an empathy of a 1 and accountability of a 9. I have a negative number on enabling, and that's not what I want. I don't want a negative number. Am I tracking with how I can use this functionally in situations like the example I just gave?
Yes, and I'm going to take us one step a little bit higher when I talk about what we're trying to balance. You are so right on the money right now in terms of what the bigger picture is that people want. Let's come back to that example and let me lay the foundation, if I may.
Yeah, please.
There are 3 things every human being is going to balance when they take or look. So it can happen in the hiring process or in the recruiting process, or it happens even after I've taken the job. There are I call them the 3 R's. The very first thing that a person starts to consider when they take on this new role, and we're going to talk about that example of, oh, what do you mean I've got to be in the office now? So we're dealing with so much fallout that I want to show how you can put things in place proactively to minimize this fallout that we're discussing. The first R that we look at when we take on a position are the requirements. What do you want me to do? If I take this job, what will I need to do to be successful at this job? Now, there's 2 types of requirements. There's direct. We can get those from the job description. If I'm a sales rep, it's very distinctive what I'm going to be doing to be an effective sales rep. If I'm a customer service rep, if I'm a food service person, that job description is very succinct. It's very basic. All right, we call those direct. Now, to your point, there's indirect requirements as well, and these start to get into that human dynamic. So, for example, all of a sudden, or even if I knew going in, I've got to make an hour commute to the office 3 days a week. That's a requirement to be at this job. Now, if that morphs or changes, that's why it's important to constantly have these leveling conversation, or this 3R conversation, as I describe it in the book. I need to know where you're at, because even a requirement, someone's going to interpret it differently. For some, it's a requirement. For others, it's a reward. Case in point, that hour commute. Some people might go, oh, no way. I am not getting in a car and sitting there for an hour in traffic.
Some people say, I can't wait to get in the car to listen to the Entrepreneurs United podcast.
I was just
going to
say that. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's a reward for me. Are you kidding me? I can listen to a whole podcast and not be interrupted. Do you see already? We've got to find out. So that's that first R, those requirements. Okay, now think of that as on a teeter-totter scale. We're going to put that bucket of requirements on that one side. Now, the second R hits about that job. These are the rewards. These are the tangibles. What am I going to get for meeting these requirements that I can put in my pocket? Example, paycheck. Example, benefit package. Maybe a 401k, maybe there's stock options if you're in a big corporation, a company car, maybe I'll get my student loan paid off, maybe I'll get a certification because, whatever those things are, I'm going to make this a transaction right now. So here we've got those two R's, right? I got this set of requirements. I've got these rewards. So far, hey, if they balance, life's pretty good, right? But we can't stop there because we're human beings. And here comes the third R. And it's the most important one we can contend with in today's workplace. It's the respect. To what degree do I feel valued here? Do I feel appreciated? Do I have autonomy? Do I show up and have a purpose? That's the big rally cry for so many employees today. Am I making a difference? Do I have a sense of belonging here? Self-esteem? Hello, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There they are. Now, if you've got an employee who thinks that the respect is equal to the rewards, to the requirements, I promise you, you're never going to lose them. They've got the perfect combination. And then you start to see the variations. Let's go to the example you just talked about. All of a sudden now, unbeknownst to me, I have to make this hour commute into the office 4 days a week. And that commute on my scale is not a reward. That's a requirement. Or all these other requirements start to go higher and higher and higher. And we're seeing that today with even top performers. Oh, just one more thing. Oh, by the way, or could you, you're so good at that. And we misuse top performers because they are. And then all of a sudden they leave and we don't know why. Well, we just bombarded their requirement bucket and we didn't keep up with the rewards or the respect. Now you've got people that'll stay at a job with a heavy reward bucket, but the respect could be very low. Typically what you'll hear, I don't like this job. I can't wait to get out of this job. But you know what? Where am I going to go? Where am I going to go and make this kind of money? They don't treat me well. I get stomach upsets when I, think about Monday morning. I don't even want to go into the job, but I'll stay. Okay. Are they engaged? No. And then you've got the small startups. What about all of our listeners and people that I work with every day? They're small business people. They're entrepreneurs. They're not going to have big, deep pockets to balance this sometimes, reward bucket. So what I've got to do on that is make sure I'm compensating for the respect. And it's interesting what we're seeing changing here. We see as a result of about, the last 2 years, employees now are willing to take far fewer rewards if the respect is off the chart. They'll say, hey, I'll walk away from the hustle culture. I don't need X dollars a year. My health it's not worth it. I will do something else and be willing to make less money and be happier in a job that's more fulfilling. So I hope that answers the question as we go back to really looking at these 3 R's. That's the magic code in terms of dealing with every single person. And that's the key. We can't throw, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I love it. And I love the visual you gave us too, which is the balance, right? The scale, where you have the requirements on one side and you have 2 R's on the other side, which is the rewards and the respect. And it has to balance. And if employees are not happy in your organization, chances are it's off kilter. The requirements are too heavy, or something's off, and you got to figure that out. And there's maybe 3 relative examples that I can think about too, regarding these R's that kind of connect with me a little bit. One is very, very clear when someone starts with your organization. What is it? What are the requirements in direct? I mean, I literally had an interview recently where the example we gave happened. This person has an hour and a half commute to the office. And I challenged them probably more on that requirement than the requirements of the job, because when they're interviewing, it's like, yeah, it's no problem. Yeah, I like driving. Yeah, it's no problem. Yeah. But then 6 months in, when the other requirements are heavy, right? They're like, I don't like the
Yeah.
commute's too much. I'm going to quit. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. We covered that. So, you have a responsibility as an employer to really look through those indirect requirements and be very,
Correct.
very clear on the requirements. And we had a podcast guest, Jeff Cohen, who wrote a book, Count Onable, which is what can we count on you to perform here, and are you agreeing to be count onable for these items, right? So I really that really connected with me. On I'm going to jump rewards for a second. I want to come back to that. On the respect one, you really hit something in my mind when you were talking a little bit earlier about employee A wants you to talk to them every morning for 5 minutes, but employee B just wants this. And way too many entrepreneurs have never been trained in situational leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And Rich, just note to file, we need to have an episode all in of itself on situational leadership. It's
Absolutely.
something that probably was one of the most impactful leadership training I've ever had in my career, that quite honestly, I kind of forgot about until this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you,
Where they
Ken
fit.
Blanchard. Yeah.
Yeah, where they fit on this
Yeah.
competency versus commitment quadrant, and how are you going to manage them, I think is one of the biggest failures leaders have today, which unintentionally leads to a lack of respect.
There you go. And
Right? You
then
have a
we're
high
always,
performer that you're trying to micromanage. They're like, this sucks. This person doesn't respect me. But then you
yeah,
have a low performer that wants you to micromanage them and help them get out of their trouble. And they're like, oh, these are not helping me. So I think way too many managers, leaders treat everybody the same way because they think that's the way it's supposed to be. And that
correct.
leads to a drop in respect. So that's that piece I want to maybe just dive into for a few minutes. And the last piece, and then I want to hear your thoughts on these. On the rewards piece, I have a thought that there's one thing between the rewards you're making by working at the company, but then I think that we're also heading into a new area today where if your employees are really working for a paycheck to pay for their food and living, and they're not creating their own balance sheet for their own families in a very strong way, you maybe not be doing your job as a leader and employer, because everybody right now is looking at themselves as an independent contractor, so to speak. They have a balance sheet, they have a family, they have an entity called their family, and they're trying to build something of significance. And so I'm a big believer in employees having an ownership stake in the business, feeling like they're more
Yes.
entrepreneurs than employees. And all
Yes.
these employee words like employee, job, HR department, I think they're getting antiquated in
I
today's
would agree.
world. And that's another area of rewards that I think entrepreneurs really need to be thinking about. So I
Yes. I
love
think you're
those three
spot
R's.
on, John. You're absolutely spot on. Yes.
So let me hit that last piece. Um, I understand that people are looking to be with organizations where they have a sense of purpose, the core values align, that they have a leader that respects them. I get all that piece. And I think everybody listening to this gets it. Where they know how to execute it or not, it's a different story, but they get that. On the rewards piece, what is your feeling on that employee mentality versus entrepreneur mentality, and giving people more of a stake in what they're doing? Are you seeing that evolve with
Yes.
entrepreneurs you're talking to, and what are you seeing out there?
Yes, great question. And the best answer I can say, it's up to the leader to have that very discussion with every single individual, because it can be different. Again, to your point, so well taken, we tend to treat people the way we want to be treated. That's
Mhm,
the golden rule.
mhm,
I've upgraded that to the platinum rule. Do unto others as they need to have done by you. And have that conversation. So, for example, what's quality recognition or a reward to one may be very different from another. And I think even offering, and here's where leaders are going to most succeed, offering the choices. It's all about that flexibility. I might have an employee through our conversation, and I could say, gee, there's stake in this game for you, and you have a desire to become your own company owner someday. My job here would be to grow you into that position. That's something viable for you. So we're going to do that by these three things. How does that feel for you? It might be a stake in the business. Another employee might say, Merrylue, I have no desire to be anything greater than answering the phones and being the best director of first impressions that I can to our customers. That's all I want. And if I could switch that out for a higher starting wage because I need that security, trading off equity in the business because that doesn't interest me right now, okay. So I think the beauty of an entrepreneur, we can also be perhaps more flexible. I think corporations are slower in figuring all that out for equity purposes and fairness and all of that. But it really depends on that human being. And in the book, to your point earlier, leaders are not trained on how to do this. And I'm a very I guess I should say I'm very pragmatic when it comes to leadership. Don't just give me this pie in the sky consulting work that says, Merrylue, to build a great team, you've got to start with authenticated trust and build a foundation. And what does that even mean? I don't know how to do that. I'm a leader in the. And so I will show you even in the book how to have the conversations. What are the questions to ask? Here's the checklist. Don't just tell me, make sure your person has a great first day on the job. Okay, I bought them pizza. Does that count? What do I do? And it's got the checklist. Here's what you should do if they're remote or if they're in the office. So it depends. I hate that as just an answer.
Yeah, but I love it. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
I just sat here for a few minutes and told you guys that the most impactful training I ever had in my life was learning about situational leadership. Well, why shouldn't rewards be situational and requirements be situational and everything be situational? Because it depends, because the human factor is the most important factor. And you may think getting pizza for the first day is fantastic, but you have somebody who doesn't like pizza and all they eat is X.
Right.
You respect them in that moment. You didn't even ask them if they wanted pizza.
You wrote my whole book in one paragraph. Exactly right.
No, it's really connecting with me, the situational component. So let me kind of take a tool out of Rich's toolbox. He likes to ask our guests, okay, I'm listening. I'm keying into what you're talking about now. Like, you got to be situational in all these areas because it does depend. There's a massive human factor. And maybe you led us with there's questions in their book, but what do I do today? So I'm an entrepreneur today. Maybe I haven't been focused on these 3 R's. Maybe I need to start from scratch, but I have 20, 30, 50 employees. And what do I do? Where do I start with it? What's actionable for me to take from this conversation and say, okay, I got some work to do. Here's step 1, 2, 3 of what I'm going to start doing based on your book or feedback.
Right. Great question. Start here. Number 1, make a list of the employees that are currently responsible for reporting to you. Number 2, next to each employee's name, in whatever way you want, score from 1 to 5 or just write low, high, medium, it doesn't matter. To what degree are you effectively connecting with each one of these people? And by connecting, I mean, this person's aspirations. You know what rewards this person would define. Is it a bag of Skittles or is it a $5 Starbucks coupon? Do you even know? What are all the human elements that you can know? And if you create kind of a grid and you see that 90% of that grid is blank, I'm fine with that, because you just created your own homework. Now you know where to go to fill in this grid. So I want you to kind of think of it as playing people bingo. Can you put every person in one of these squares and know at least 2 or 3 things about them? And if you just start there, that will get you used to connecting with people on the people level, the human factor. And that's hard for some people, especially entrepreneurs. We're running businesses. We forget about that, the people that are there to help us do that. But start with that. You can't manage what you don't know. So start there. Just take inventory. Step one.
So how does that work? I'm trying to picture the conversation with entrepreneurs who have had employees who are tenured at all. Here's how it doesn't work. Merrylue, I know you've been working for the company for 8 years now. And, it occurred to me, I never decided to ask you, what's your favorite alcohol that you'd love to get as a gift?
That's the short approach.
I've never asked you about your family. And
Right.
I guess I just realized that I never have. So how many kids you got?
Yeah, would you fill out this questionnaire?
Yeah, so
okay, let's role play.
Yeah,
Let's role play
I get it if we're starting up with someone and you're taking notes and you're asking questions and you can develop the new you who is very into the human factor. But the reality is we have entrepreneurs who have existing people with existing relationships and constructs and expectations of behavior. And how would an entrepreneur introduce this new
New me?
I'm going to start doing this human factor thing.
I heard this.
I hope you don't think it's weird.
It goes something like this, Rich. I just want to take a minute. If I've not said it enough, I want to make sure I'm saying it loud and clear right now. You've been with me 8 years, and I just need you to know to what depth I appreciate that. You've been with me when we started or when we hit the mainstream. More importantly, you've been with me when we've all kind of encountered what the heck has just happened, these last 2 years. You've stuck it out and you've been here. The most important thing going forward, Rich, is that we keep all the best of what we've got going here. We ensure that continues. And I want to just kind of go back to basics. What are you getting out of this position that's the most meaningful to you? And what is it I can be doing differently that would support the great stuff you're getting out of this position? And what do I need to be doing differently? Do we spend enough time just getting to know each other? Do we know each other well enough? Where is that balance for you? So I'm getting to that conversation, but it's not so static, which I love because that's real world. That's exactly the kind of conversation I would kind of come into the back door with that. Rich, what do you think's been making us work so well together? What am I doing that I can keep doing more of? And hey, I want you to be around for the next 18 years. What does that look like for you? Are we growing you in the direction you want to go? So it's that kind of work.
I heard a couple of things. It was really appreciation, and then it was retention, and then it was back to basics. And I love the first two questions you asked. Not that I didn't love all of them, but the first two struck me as, what are you getting out of the position? And what can I change or do to support you in your role better? So I think that's excellent, and just wanted to recap that. 113 years ago, and I know I've overused that so far in the conversation, but I think it's awesome that you actually have like the number of years. 113 years ago, I went to command and control style, mostly on assembly line, you said, because Henry Ford. Totally makes sense. And my assumption is that it was done that way because the human factor creates inefficiencies. And it was very efficient to say, here's what you do. You pick up piece A and you move it from point 1 to point 2, and you do that as fast as you can. And yes, the reward is that you get to do it more and you stick around and you're tenured and you have a job, and we'll give you some cost of living raises as they come about. So start moving piece A from position 1 to position 2. If you have creative ideas on how to be able to do that, go back to what I just said. Move piece A to position 1 to position 2. That's it. The introduction of the human factor introduces all of these inefficiencies of emotion and opinions and all of this stuff. Like, where does this balance that it's like, hey, it's a little too much of asking everybody their opinion on every topic, and we're trying to get consensus on everything, and we just can't make a decision because not everybody agrees, but we want to respect people. Where's this balance of the human factor but not being incredibly inefficient lie?
Yes. I think number one, if I may go back to the assembly line and pull out some fascinating research that was done at the time, to your point, yes, that person's job was to hook on that car assembly line, was to hook widget A and widget B together. They did that 10 hours a day, often with no breaks or lunch. That was their job. When Henry Ford looked at the productivity over time, he started to notice after about 2 to 3 years of this model, productivity was declining. Even though people were doing it faster and they were doing it in greater volume, the quality and the productivity was seriously declining. So we can thank Henry Ford for introducing this human factor. And what he did was he realized, enter the human factor. These are human beings. And so what he brought in was things like posters of happy customers who were so grateful that they were able to have this beautiful car. He brought in the opportunity for them to, at discount buying their own car. So they got to see this sense of purpose of the higher calling of what I'm doing. Productivity skyrocketed. So there's value, to your point, in entertaining the human factor. However, that's where the accountability has to come in as the leader. I can say, hey, I'm open to everybody's input. We're going to reach a consensus, not necessarily an agreement, because you're right, we're never going to all agree on everything, but can we come to a consensus? And if I just give my people a chance for a voice, and that's the piece that was missing, Rich, people for these 113 years, they had a job, but they didn't have a voice. And people just want to be heard. So I can make it very clear. I want to hear you have a voice. Express your opinion. We'll take it under advisement. We'll work collaboratively together. The best leaders right now are tapping into the people who are actually running the business and doing the job. And they're using that intelligence, if you will, to work together as a team. So yes, you can get into analysis paralysis, and that's where the leader has to say, look, we're going to, an hour, we're going to discuss this, and we're going to come out with 2 decisions and let everybody say what you need, and we're going to move forward. You can even instill something I call a team agreement. Have the team decide, are we going to start meetings on time? Well, if that's the case, and that's going to be in your team charter, you better not show up late as the leader, because people are only going to respect you to the point that they see you model what you're asking them to do. So, but put them all together in a room and say, what are the 5 things we want to, demonstrate here as a team? I actually have an activity and a challenge for the listeners. Because if you talk about this environment today, there's a lot of discussion around this word culture. I don't know what that means. I mean, really, we can define that all day long. Culture is really the look and the feel you get when you walk into a team environment. You can define it. And it's the leader that dictates that culture. Culture is going to happen. It's going to be like weeds in a garden. You cannot not have a culture. Excuse the double negative. Culture is going to be a byproduct. And here's the challenge to help all leaders define what this culture means and get it to the point where the team's going to help define and own it. You ask the team, and this is in the book actually, and I'm just giving it as a challenge to use as an activity. Think of the person that you want to most highly respect in that team. So if you're in a company, could be if you're not the owner of the company, it could be the owner of the company, it could be the president, it could be maybe your most important customer. It doesn't matter. But who is the person you want to most highly think of this person thinking highly of this team? Okay, got that person in mind. Now, ask the team, if that person were to come and visit our business for a day, what 3 words would you want that person to walk away with as the impression of spending time with that team? What are those 3 words? Have everybody write them down independently on a 3x5 card or on a Slack board, whatever. If you're a combination remote or hybrid, have everybody have a voice, put down those 3 words. Now, you synthesize everyone's input, chances are you're going to come up with some of the very same words. It might be hardworking, it might be fun, it might be productive, whatever they are, but we've got those 3 words. The third part to this is you ask the team, okay, team, what are we going to do on our daily interaction with our customers, our daily interaction and behaviors with each other? What are the actual things we can tangibly do that will drive those 3 words? And that's how you create a collaborative, focused culture. And everything we're doing as a team better be promoting those 3 words, or it doesn't fit. And people love that they're shaping this culture and they're owning it. So that's a tangible example to drive that forward.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah, I
for
love
that.
that. And every company has values, right? So whether they're just posters on the wall or they're being, displayed by everybody on a daily basis, that's one different conversation. But what we're talking about here is as your team, whether it be the whole company, because you have a small team of 5 or 6 people, or whether it be, a division within a larger organization, for that group to get together. And if I understand it correctly, envision the person you want to respect your team the most. If they were to come to you and visit you, what are the 3 words you'd want them to walk away saying about your team? Do a brainstorm exercise around that.
Mhm.
Once you've synthesized that down to what these 3 words are that you guys would want the most respected person to think about your team, then let's define the actions that we're going to hold each other accountable to day in and day out, so that when that person does come, these are the 3 words they'll say about us.
Perfect. And you can formulate that in a team agreement. You can even have some image fun with that.
Yeah.
Take those 3 words and Google them, click on images, and now you've got something visual that people could rally around. And you could put that on your team agenda. You put that on your email signature. It becomes this rally cry people are polarized around.
Yeah, and when you say, look, that leader or that team, they just defined their culture. Now they just need to live by it. I mean, that's
There
a
you
very
go.
simple way to do it, because there are cultures within cultures, as we know, right? There's a
Oh,
company
yes.
culture, then there's team culture, and there's a lot of cultures within cultures that exist out there. Big Quit Survival Guide is your book.
Yes.
And I'm sure people can go and get that book and learn a lot more about what we talked about here today. How can our guests, if they want to get more of the Joy Group or Job Joy Group or
Mhm.
yourself, where else can they get more information?
Yes, I am most active on LinkedIn. I post there regularly. I have a blog. I have all kinds of free resources. You can click on, in fact, I'm going to give a gift to the listeners as well.
Right.
If you click on the tab Survival Kit, and enter the word survival. I have put together a complete list of all the tools, the checklists, everything that I was describing that's in each of the chapters. It's all in one place. It can be downloaded and printed in an 8.5 by 11 format. So you can go in and just go access all of those tools right there.
Awesome. And that's
Very generous.
bigquitsurvivalguide.com. So
Yes.
bigquitsurvivalguide all together in one word.com. And
Correct.
on the site, there's download survival kit. There's a passcode you can enter, which is survival. And I'm going to do this right now because I want this stuff.
Yes. In fact,
Uh,
as you're repeating that back to me, I have to make sure it's either survival or survive.
survival is it. I just
Is
got
it?
in.
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
downloading this stuff. I mean, these types of free tools and resources are so
Yeah.
valuable
Yeah,
to entrepreneurs
they
listening
are.
to these conversations, and just you may not use all of it, but read through it, look at what's there, because to answer Rich's question earlier, how do you do this? You sit down with an employee and ask them what their favorite ice cream is after 8 years. Like, how do you do this using guides like the survival guide, or even what you gave us, like the people bingo approach of, hey, put that sheet together. They're all actionable components.
Yes,
Really appreciate you bringing those with you today. It was a great conversation,
absolutely.
and can't wait to learn more.
Absolutely. Truly my pleasure. My passion is we've got to help these people. They're struggling. Leaders in every aspect today. We're trying to figure it out. And I wanted to take as much noise out of the system and make it as streamlined as possible. So it's truly a pleasure to give that opportunity to leaders today to do that.
Well, and I'd like to say thanks for your generosity. I just went on the website myself. And for our listeners, if you download this, she doesn't even collect your email, under the assumption that if she could give value and you're interested in more, you'll get in touch with her. So this is not any type of a ploy, and it's a 72-page survival kit that appears to be chocked with value. So thanks again for your generosity.
My pleasure, truly.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
John, I wrote down an equation, and it wasn't the first one she gave, the empathy minus accountability equals enabling, and I'm happy to debrief on that. But I wrote down another equation that was retention is when respect and rewards is greater than requirements.
Yeah.
Turnover is when respect and rewards are less than requirements. And I loved her take on getting back to basics in talking to people and asking them, what are you getting out of this position? Which is essentially identifying what are the things that demonstrate respect, what are the rewards that you're enjoying, and then the other piece is, what can I do to support you best? Which is really maybe around the requirements. What do we need to do with those requirements to help this equation be the right way for retention?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we could dive into one of those R's, Rich. The requirements, rewards, and respect. And if you take that respect one and you pull it aside for a second, and then you look at the formula you talked about, which is empathetic minus accountability equals enabling. I think what Merrylue is really talking about here is, as entrepreneurs, that we're no longer living in a command and control kind of workforce, right? We're in a more human factor area. And so I know a ton of entrepreneurs that walk on eggshells. They don't know what to do because they have to show empathy. They can't really hold anybody accountable. And then they enable their workforce to kind of do whatever they're doing. And everything's not working the way it should be. And so what Merrylue is really talking about is, how do you respect your employees by also not enabling them? By also knowing when to be empathetic, when to hold people accountable, which brought me all the way full circle in my mind to when she gave the example to situational leadership and how critical the training of entrepreneurs on what situational leadership is and how to display it and on a daily basis with your team members, because not all humans are the same. And so there's the human factor, but within the human factor, they don't all want cheese pizza for their first day at work, and they can't all be treated equally. So that respect factor is one that I think we should double click on again and get a little bit deeper into how can entrepreneurs be more situational, be more servant leaders, as Merrylue would talk about, right? To really show their employees a side of respect that's just not one size fits all.
And I feel like in that double click on respect, as you said, would it show up that equation? Empathy minus accountability equals enabling.
Yep.
And at first I heard that enabling, that's like, oh, it's bad to enable people, but there's positive enabling.
Sure.
And then there's negative enabling. And I think that is an excellent equation, because it can be confusing as a leader, where you think, somebody has a problem with a particular guideline, or they weren't able to meet a particular goal, and you need to bring empathy into the workforce, and you say, oh, well, I understand, and it's okay, and things happen, and those are all the empathy side. But that empathy in the lack of accountability is negative enabling.
Yep.
We need to at least balance the empathy and accountability, or have a touch more accountability, but also there has to be empathy. Otherwise, you go bankrupt in that relationship. So I think that would show up in your double click on respect. And to come back around on your situational leadership, I think you nailed it. I love that stuff, and I'd love to have a podcast where we talk about that. But on situational leadership, what you nailed, I think, that's so critical is leaders have a default style that they prefer to lead in. Many leaders just say, well, that's how I am. I'm the head of the company, or I'm the leader, or I'm the person who hired you. In a hierarchy, I am superior. You're going to have to get on board with how I work, or go ahead and walk.
Yep.
And there's a default style of leadership. But then to acknowledge there's also a default style of how someone prefers to be led, whether they prefer directing, coaching, supporting, or delegating. There's a default style. But rising above all of those default styles is, what is the task at hand that needs to be handled based on their competence and commitment, and delivering the correct style, regardless of your preference, regardless of their preference, delivering the correct blend of support and direction based on their competence and commitment in a particular task. I know that was a lot of words, and for those that aren't versed in situational leadership, you'll want to listen to the podcast that we'll record relatively soon on it. But I think it's critical to acknowledge that not only do we have a default style, but our learners have a default style on how they prefer to be worked with, but we should not yield to either.
Yeah, and that, to me, that's why this human factor is so much more complex than command and control assembly line. Oh, move point A to point B. We are complex beings. Just look at the book that I'm sure we read 20 years ago as well, right? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, right? And we're just complex beings, and there's so many different components that come into it. And Rich, I don't care if it's a hockey coach that I see on a weekly basis because my kids are in hockey, or an entrepreneur running their business. It doesn't matter. When leaders go to their default style to manage everything in their business, that's when half the people feel like they're not being respected. And the entrepreneurs don't understand. They're like, well, I treat everybody the same. I do this. I don't understand why they don't like cheese pizza. Like, they just don't get it. And we need to understand that our team members are very complex, which comes back to this people bingo. Like, that's a scary exercise for me.
Yeah.
I'm an entrepreneur because sometimes I'm just all business all the time. And, to put down a list of all my employees and rate on a scale of 1 to 10 or high to low, what's my effective connection with these people? And do I know what they would want for a gift for their birthday? And whatever. That's a scary exercise. My sheet would be fairly empty, but I love the exercise from the perspective of, okay, I got some homework to do, as Merrylue said. Let's go figure this out. And let's make sure we do connect with our people, because productivity will grow, respect will grow, and retention will grow. Everything will go along with it. So very important exercise.
Well, and as a reminder in leading situationally, before you change leadership styles, you need to let people know. So you would say, hey, I'm going to be a little bit more directive, and here's why. So before people go running out doing this people bingo exercise, I do recommend just having a very upfront conversation about, hey, I think I may have missed some of the human factor in our relationship. I'm going to be starting to do some things a little bit differently. I want you to know you haven't done anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with me either. I'm just trying to evolve my leadership style. And part of that's going to include getting to know you a little bit better and your preferences and how we can serve you in your role here at work. I'd like to ask you a few questions. I think to let people know your shifting styles is critical to not be misinterpreted.
Yeah, no question. And that's how you get employees to feel respected, appreciated, fulfilled, and engaged.